Okay, well, hi. This is my studio. I'm Dan.
Hi. I'm Neal, and the other part of Shipsides and Eggs projects, and yes. So
Are we going to answer all the questions? I think there's a lot, aren't there?
yeah, well, first let's say thanks to Elizabeth for
Yeah,
making, because the questions are quite good.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. They're very good. So this is the first question. Um, can you speak more pointedly about your work, how your work confronts the notions that borders are a colonial tool, and possibly how you feel borders, in all their abstract forms, not just the borders of countries, are playing out in current events? Okay. I'm not sure we have said it's a colonial tool, but clearly they are.
yes.
um, I think more than colonial, present day, they're very much a kind of national tool, aren't they? Kind of something to do with nationhood and the kind of identities that are kind of manufactured, if you like, through the ideas of nationhood and borders.
Yeah, I think on the bigger scale of things, when we're talking about national borders, it becomes a bit difficult to speak about those because they're so ingrained and fundamental. But all of these borders become newsworthy when there's some political problem, which is usually a specific type of problem. So the Irish border becomes very topical for as a result of a long story, but little events that are occurring. You've got Brexit, you've got the troubles before that, and you've got the unification of Ireland back at the turn of the last century.
And also, I mean, you need to add into that the kind of the development of a European project, which kind of to a certain extent tried to kind of do away with borders, certainly within Europe. So that's kind of where that problem also kind of hits home. But also, I mean, think about it this way: that I think there's the borders or the kind of problems that borders then kind of have in crossing borders, and migration becomes the problem. And if you think kind of historically, the West has been kind of exploiting everywhere else for centuries. So that the idea of us now kind of making these really strong and hard and fast borders, if you think about it as, the kind of the pie analogy, it's the big global pie is getting smaller, and there's less of it to go around, and we are eating more of it than anyone else because we've stolen everyone else's pies. So now we're kind of up in arms that anyone wants to come here and eat some of the crumbs that are left. Going here is what I've used for a lot of the effects in the video, and this was just a very quick doodle sketch of a mashup of the Northern Irish Republic of Ireland border and the Mexico-US border. For example, it's a very, approximation in my head kind of drawing. So this is Big Bend, down in Texas, kind of Mexico, all the way up to California. And then from the Northern Irish Republic sense, it comes down here into Fermanagh, up around here, and up through Strabane and up to Donegal, kind of at the top. So it's a real approximation. But then I kind of developed it as a drawing like this. And then a lot of this kind of material was used in the video. So in fact, you can see in the background there.
I think there's another way to look at it as well. I mean, when we talk about culture and art, usually culture tends to like to talk about artists' work as being about something. It's topical. It's about this or it's about that. And clearly our work does deal on with politics and things like that. But another way to look at it is that the borders are about a place to live, a place that you can call your own, so to speak, somewhere that you feel safe. And in our artistic practice, that's what we do. We look for a space, and we just find that we can work in a certain type of space that suits us very well. And that was with mountains, with climbing, and all mountains are particularly relating to borders anyway, because they're natural sort of frontiers. But the whole notion of borders is, from an artist's perspective, is all about pushing attitudes, pushing ideas, this type of
boundaries, isn't it? Pushing boundaries and also the boundaries that are there that are kind of supposedly to kind of shape an industry, if you like. There's the boundaries within the art world which are quite clear, and that's something we've probably struggled with at times in terms of encountering. But it's something I think we've both always felt quite a disregard for. The ways artists should work, and the kind of boundaries, if you like, they should adhere to, and when one thing is art and one thing isn't art. That's why the climbing kind of.
Yes, I mean, climbing was a place that we both found before art, and it was our country, it was our territory, it was a freedom, it was our place we could go and do what we wanted to do. And then art is much the same. It's just a space where we can live. We can live in the space of art, and that space has got a government as well. And that, we could call that the art world. We could call that the economy, the machine of art, and we're just as. And this is where the old analogy that people often say that art reflects life, and fair enough, generally it probably does. And in this sense, if you think about art as a territory, as a country, it has all of these things. So here we are in this place, and so borders, frontiers just become very natural metaphors and motifs for Dan and I to use. There is also the thing of ecology. I mean, something that we've been particularly struck in our work. It seems that we follow some thread that we've got, and then suddenly in the news something will happen. Something in the world event will happen that makes it particularly pertinent, and definitely with, I mean, Another Fine Mess, the show that we're engaged in now, that really has come to be another fine mess, and this seems to happen quite a lot with us. So it's not just borders, but it's the whole pressure that seems to be.
But I actually think there is something about the current moment, and there's obviously been moments very much like it in the past, where the politics seem to be kind of making these borders far more prevalent, more prominent, or more problematic in a way. We've obviously kind of migration and things like that, but Brexit, there's the Mexican Wall, and politics, or the public sphere or the political sphere, seems to become more fervent about imagining borders and kind of protecting borders, and populist politics, I guess, kind of loves a border, doesn't it? So
well, it's the xenophobic, it's the fear of or not the fear, or the blaming of the stranger, as opposed to the fear of the stranger.
Well, I think this goes back to my pie analogy. It's the kind of keep off our pie. Don't you come here and pinch our pies, even though we've stolen yours. I'm just looking at you. This is one of the questions that Elizabeth has set. I think it's how has this global pandemic changed the way in which you view borders? Do you think the pandemic has strengthened the division of borders that often represent or render them obsolete? I mean, pandemic, when it first hit, the first thing to happen was borders were closed, wasn't it? It was a real isolationist kind of wet dream. Quick, close the border, stop people coming in. So on that way, it's it's really thrown the border into sharp relief. Yeah, the virus doesn't bother with borders. It hasn't bothered with borders. It crosses it at will, it seems.
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean,
Any
the border.
solution needs to be, global and across borders, and not about kind of closing down and protecting what you have.
Yeah, but I mean, the border situation, certainly in Europe now, seems to be the focus has gone back to economy, and so borders are opening simply to maintain economies, and but I think, I mean, the internet is. I mean, here we are using the internet. I mean, that's a massive. That's been incredible. The vital, how vital that's been, and that doesn't really deal, or is very limited in sense to borders. I mean, I know time. I mean, it's. I mean, there's an interesting analogy during the wars, the first and the second, and probably all wars. Business, whilst countries would be at war, business would continue. So there's stories about Coca-Cola being delivered to the Luftwaffe, all the type of thing back in the Second World War. And today we have a similar thing with COVID, in that, like Amazon just continues. It just like certain businesses just continue.
We're still selling riot gear to the US and rubber bullets. I mean, there's another question later on, which I think is very much tied to this. So we may as well kind of deal with them together in a way. About this number 8, which is about kind of another fine mess was originally conceived in the context of the messiness of borders, and specifically in the context of Brexit. I mean, I think thinking about another fine mess, that some of the work very much connects to Brexit and the Irish border. Of course, it doesn't come from there. But already we were extrapolating, if you like, a lot of those ideas to also a connection with the US, not just with borders, but with cultural connections through music, through through the climb, the Wabash Cannonball, and also the kind of interest in music and its back and forthing, if you like, from Europe to the US. And the things it has picked up on the way and changed and twisted. So I think that's really the messiness of, if you want to call those borders or not, but that this kind of transatlantic boundaries. So another fine mess wasn't just specifically to do with Brexit. So we're also finding these things where Irish soldiers fought for the Mexicans in the the US-Mexican War and things like that. So that the kind of messiness of it is probably what intrigues us.
We definitely don't. It's difficult maybe from outside of the sort of the artistic perspective, because we don't necessarily set out to deal with the topic. We say, oh, we've got an exhibition. What are we going to do? There's certain things that we feel are pertinent, particularly with the show in Washington and Ireland. So we look at those things, but generally these are all things that we're actually interested in, like anyway. I mean, both of us have got an interest in music that has a strong connection with America. If you live in Northern Ireland, you just can't avoid the Christian and Catholic Christian perspectives which are connected to Ireland, to America, US, and all of the music and stuff. So
Yeah.
Another Fine Mess. I mean, Another Fine Mess is really just Laurel and Hardy. Um, it's it comes the phrase the phrase comes from that from those movies, and then we just say, perfect. That's a perfect fit for what we need.
I mean, maybe to add to expand that a bit, because we do find ourselves in a mess or predicament quite often with these projects, if you like, or these works where we don't have a defined goal, we don't have a kind of set methodology, if you like. That we didn't even start this work in relation to the opportunity of an exhibition. It began way back whenever we started working together as a kind of, let's just see what happens when we start working together. So this idea of making music out of borders was a seed that has grown throughout. And actually years ago, we did a thing in Venice, and even prior to that, Neal had said, we need to do this similar thing that we're doing with the Dolomites with the Irish border. And I said, yeah, it makes sense. Let's just put it on the long finger, so to speak. And then, opportunities kind of come along which allow you to kind of get your teeth into things a bit more. So none of this was specifically planned for a kind of commentary on Brexit or the US in particular, but it's a culmination, if you like, of a melting pot of little methods or ideas or ways of working which are always developing and always changing.
Very much so, yeah. I guess culture and the events of life, they impress on Dan and me, on everybody, and as a result we react, we respond in a certain way, and so all of the things that have sort of like sculpted our characters and personalities, the things we like, the television, all of our parents, everything like that, these things have, in a sense, molded us into a certain type of shape, and we I guess we respond to that shape. We look at that shape and we follow it, and these are the things that come out. Another person would probably maybe do something else, but I would say that there's certain things that are generally fairly uniform from our backgrounds that most people would probably understand.
What are they, Neal?
What are they?
Yeah.
Well, for example, I live in France, and like I've just written a song, and it deals a lot with Protestant Christian sort of upbringing, stuff like that, and refers to certain specific things, which over here people just don't get. There's a little, like when I was a little kid, because I was brought up in a kind of religious family, Protestant family, Irish Protestant family. And there was all of these little songs that you would sing, sort of like Sunday school songs, and they call them choruses. And many of them come from the States, in fact, or very popular in the States. And so a lot of people would know these things, but over here in France, they don't know them at all. So there's a shared culture. And a lot of the work that we do is a shared. Like when we use Another Fine Mess, it's most people know what the reference is, and so maybe that's something that we're particularly engaged in. That we look for signifiers, we look for references which are coded in such a way that they, we play a lot with language, basically, with the coding language.
Number two, does work in collaborative, because I think this follows on from what we were just saying there about complexity and not having, probably to be a political artist in the way of making political statements, you would have to have one author. I think working collaboratively, immediately there's two voices in the thing, so there's never a kind of settled moment where there's a definite. or you could argue that actually is more political, but something that has more voices and more complexity is more political. But if we're talking about political statements, which is what the question asked, that's more definitive, and it probably needs a more single voice where we don't really do that so well. So.
I don't know. I think, well, single voice. I think we do have a sort of single voice in the sense that, you know, we allow each other to take the lead, to say their piece, and we trust that the other person will be sensitive to. So if they're going down one road, they'll, like, if Dan's going off one way, he'd probably realize that either I'm with him on that way, or maybe I'm not completely with him, but he'll say that, and I'll just let him go anyway. So we have a trust that we don't, because it always works out better in the end. It's just always better, because basically, yeah, I guess we trust each other in that respect.
Yeah, and I often think that's about, one of the things that's good is that you have permission to do something.
Yeah.
That's quite a rare thing sometimes, because you don't often always give yourself permission, particularly to go out on a limb on something which you're not sure about. Whereas just a little nod from me to Neal, or Neal to me, saying, "Oh, that's something there," can help you go a lot further than you might have done, or on your own, where you might have bailed out sooner on and thought, well, there's not much there. But
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's very much a yes, you can practice, and I think that's part of what we, it's to say yes, you can do that, and why not, and we make it as, and it's always a surprise. We're never quite sure how things are going to work out, and it's always a surprise.
Not far from here, just over the border, is a place no one would ever find it, it's so well concealed.
Come about Shipsides and Begs, what information and collective practice?
Well, there's a story there in a way, isn't there? That we were two. Well, obviously we were individual artists. We both had similar practice, both involving our kind of passion for climbing, and more so mountaineering with Neal. And I think we had a paranoid relationship for a while. Neal was in Glasgow, I was in Belfast, probably at a similar level in terms of showing in exhibitions and reviews and that kind of thing. And so there was, I don't know, for a number of years that was the situation. And then we met, just decided to meet, didn't we? And I think I met you in Paris. I was traveling through somewhere.
Yeah.
And we thought, seems all right. And then shortly after that, I had a residency in Spain, and it was in Montserrat, near Catalonia, in fact. And I thought, well, it's a great place to climb. Why doesn't Neal join me for a bit, and we'll just see. So it came out of that. And then material from that, it was only a week or something, was pretty rich and pretty interesting. And a number of works came out of that, which we were kind of had this, well, back then we thought we might need a really kind of clear system for whose work was whose, and how do we discuss the overlap. So that continued for a little while, and then we decided, well, it doesn't really matter. We're sharing all this together. It's all just us.
Yeah, I mean, something we found in our practice, and maybe again could be said to be political, is that because we're both known as individual artists, and as well as being Shipsides and Begs, and some people find it extremely difficult. Like just the other day, I was asked to do a show, and they said, "Neal, we would like you to do a show." And I said, "Okay, great. Well, let's. I'd like to do it with Shipsides and Begs." They said, "No, we want you." And I said, "Yeah, but it is that. You know, it's just that's the way it is. I mean,
I can understand it, Neal.
we don't have to. So much of our work crosses over. For example, one of the works that they would like to show in this niche is to do with star maps, and they look like stars. Anyway, so I've done loads and loads and loads of these things, and then for another fine mess, Dan took over. He did it. He did a whole series of them.
Well,
and,
it seems to make sense that we were dealing with the border and the elevation of the border. I thought, well, why don't we make that into a series of maps? And so
yeah,
I kind of got Neal to kind of show me his technique and went off and developed it into my technique, which is a bit different. Mons over in the east, down from Monaghan, Almar, up kind of around Cavan, and a Skillen, up lower Loch Allen over in the west. This point almost reaches the west coast, doesn't quite, and then up through Strabane and up to Derry, Londonderry, which of course extends. It finishes here, but the rest is Donegal over here, and the county of Londonderry from a Northern Irish kind of perspective. So that's how they fit together. So the border literally runs through the middle of these black things here. So we took these maps. I'm going to open one up here. Let me just see if this is going to work. I marked all the summits, the summit plateaus. Masked this in effect, and then painted the rest of the map. So what you effectively have here is Upper Loch Earn, all the summits, all the kind of drumlin points. There's a lot of drumlins in this area, as you see. It's very kind of complex geography and geology here. This is kind of drumlin territory, so you get these constellations essentially of all the high points. Now some of these high points are not mountain summits, some of them are around here. But they're little peaks of drumlins which show on the contour maps, maybe only a number of meters higher than its surrounding area, but they make these quite beautiful star maps. So the whole series connects together to essentially star map the border, if you like. So there's a kind of constellation of otherness, of kind of astralness, of another world kind of beyond the kind of territory of the border, if you like, or above the territory of the border, or a kind of inverse reflection of how we might think of the border.
And it's really interesting, but in the art world, that's really unheard of. Like it's sort of for somebody to take a major work that's in collections and that money from institutions has been invested into star maps by Neal Beggs, this type of thing. Suddenly, for that artist to just say, well, I'm going. Dan's made those ones. There was a star. He did those, and it's this really twists and turns it's very hard for the art institutions to get their head around this. So that's something that we're quite interested in as within the practice of playing around with those notions. Instead of moving the art forward as opposed to moving the personality forward.
If you can't raise your own cornbread, sing lamb and will remain. For lazy man I won't maintain, lazy man I won't maintain.
that's different working together than working alone is that you can pick up on something I say or draw or video that I haven't taken quite so far, you know, and you pick up something halfway through the way I've developed something, you pick something and you take that without the baggage and develop it in a different way. And then likewise, that might hang in the air somewhere and I might pick something from what you've developed there and bring it back and develop it. So in a way you get to kind of lose some of the anxious baggage over authorship and what this means, and I've really got to do it this way or that way. And that's quite liberating. I think that allows things to develop in quite a different way.
And also the fact that we're probably set in age, we're set apart like a generation. So there's different different sort of generational terminologies and linguistics and things like that, which are all very interesting.
Let's have a look what we've got here. These are works. That's what I call a bone, and it's a work I started many years ago. I made a lot of these, and basically carved sort of like Tom and Jerry type bones out of chunks of wood, and then gave them this kind of sunburst sort of aspect to them. And those I would give away to people, or would sell them or give them away. Generally I give them away to friends or to people that to me have some significance. And over the years these have become quite emblematic of my practice, really. I'm thinking to start a new series of these bones, and again to start giving them away, and if fortunately maybe sell a few. But something that's I believe is quite particular about Dan and my work is that it has a sort of zeitgeist. It seems to without intentionality, or obviously there is intentionality, but without sort of setting out to do it, we seem to be making work which in some way responds to the increasing of response to ecological, let's put it simply, sort of ecological questions, or the questions of humanity, of how we are going to how we can deal with the rise in the conflict between human ambition or material greed, or whatever you want to call it, and the resources of the planet, that would be one aspect. And this work for me more and more seems to sort of engage a little bit on that. It's clearly sort of a human bone, or what I'm saying, it's a human bone, and it's wrapped up in trees. And trees and humans are something that we seem to be dealing with quite a lot.
The website mentions that this is the latest chapter within a series of fictional narratives. Can you explain the fictional elements in the story and tell, and how the boundary between fiction and reality? Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, because I think our practice does quite straightforwardly combine things which you might understand as documentary type footage with very invented material or created material, or well, it's not really fanciful, but it's invented material.
Well, it's invented. We put things together to create new, or not necessarily new ones, but just like cooking. You know, what happens if you put this and this together? And we just throw those things together, and there's usually they make sense. Some sense comes out.
But it's fictional because it's the product of artistic license, really. And it's not a documentary practice which has at least the kind of pretense of being faithful to some kind of truth.
The film that we're making is definitely that probably is the best example of fictional aspects. We just allow we allow things just to slide in anywhere. We don't in this sense it's very sort of like magic realism or something like that.
That's probably where the idea of fiction comes in. That it's not. I mean, I get very frustrated when documentary makers are kind of framed very much in this thing of telling the truth or telling representing reality, or these are all constructs that we're playing with, and I think artists should use their artistic license a little bit more to make more work more interesting. And I think that's probably more truthful and more a much richer kind of engagement with the world.
The Clockmore Stone, legend has it, was thrown as a weapon by the Irish giant Finn Tornac, killing Roscaer, the giant of ice and winter. It was not Finn McCool, as some, including my dad, have previously said. What is interesting for this story is that the stone was hurled northwards over the loch from Carlingford Mountain, killing the ice giant in the foothills of the Mourne Mountains to the north. Geologically, this erratic granite boulder does originate from the south, landing and settling itself in the north as the glacier melted away beneath it. The stone then was hurled or dispatched from what is nowadays Southern Ireland into what is Northern Ireland today. A proto-cross-border killing, perhaps.
There's this notion that you can't move forward without imagination. Fiction is what allows us. Fiction creates fact. Without dreaming, you can't go anywhere. So we dream. And we try to make the root of our dream honest. It's not fake. And this is particularly so in the music with like the Frontier piece. I think we've been asked to speak a little bit about that, which is a very it's actually a very difficult thing to do. You take the border, you take all the elevations along that border every 30 meters, and then you then find a system where you can turn that into music. But in music, you've only got 7 notes, 7 full notes, so somehow you've got to. Now, if we were just doing sort of like noise art or something like that, it wouldn't matter. You could go like this, making lots of sound. The frequency would change with the elevation. But we're not trying to do that. We're actually trying to make music, which is, this gets into a difficult area, but let's call it musical, like a tune, to make a tune. And this becomes much, much more difficult because you have, you've got to take this data and create a tune, create a musical composition. You've got to craft it. But then you've got to use certain rules and certain mathematics and certain principles for crafting, and you have to decide how far you will go outside, how far you will bend things, and what you will bend and what you won't bend. And that, I think, is very important.
Okay, so another aspect of our project, in a way, looking at the border, is thinking about it sonically. So these are a series of well, it's data really of the border, so it runs from east all the way to west. So this is Carlingford, and this is right up towards Donegal, Lochfoyle. So each of these rectangles we're calling a profile, and within each there are 512 data points. These are essentially graphs, so these are data points. And we've divided the whole board into 26 because it fits well with 512 and the following calculations that we'll talk through later, which become quite useful. So 26, that's the number of profiles in the border. But of course, we need to, we've converted all the elevation data into MIDI data. So in fact, that is MIDI data that's come from the elevation data. But MIDI data isn't broken into keys. So we've had to then, all the A, C, D, E, F keys, G, we've then had to kind of develop into keys. So here's the data again in a slightly different form. This is the original data. Now all the zeros are where the MIDI keys, which we saw in the profiles, the MIDI numbers don't fit into the notes in a particular key. So this is D. So a lot of those notes, maybe a 48, would have ended up as a 0 because it's not in the key of D. 49, 40, 49, 0, 50, 0, 0. So we've had to adjust those so that there are no, a 0 would be a kind of a flat, that would be nothing really. And we want a positive sound in each one. So we've had to kind of patch these up or adjust them. So wherever there's a 0, 49, so through to 49, that will probably be a line of 49s. Now there's a lot of flat areas on the border because of lakes, lochs and rivers. So that's something else we've kind of had to work with, which is interesting because, you know, the kind of concept of a drone, particularly in traditional music, you seem quite pertinent there. So yeah, and then breaking it into bars. So these are all the different bars for the border. Okay. Now I can show you another way of looking. So D major. Let's go that one again. So these are all the bars. And then they're unadjusted there, but they're adjusted here. So that bundle of notes, MIDI notes, is here. Now these are all MIDI notes that fit into the key of D. So this is all D. Now the key of A will be slightly different and the key of C will be slightly different, but still matching the profile. Okay, so that's so all these calculations I think they are important because they also gather other kind of textual material. So they are quite precise in one sense, but they're also quite abstract in another because there's a level of judgment happening, and there's also a level of, I guess, infection. Things get brought into it at this point, decisions that we're making, but also kind of cultural textures, psychological textures, pataphysical textures are all starting to kind of accumulate, even at this point where we're dealing with hard maths in a way. Hard calculations. So the calculations throughout become quite an important thing, and I think even when we're on the road trip, there's a kind of sense of calculations that are happening to determine the border that we're encountering. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, the dance floor. Should we just say something very quickly about the dance floor?
Yeah.
The dance floor. Again, it was kind of like, well, what are we going to do? And one of us came up, well, let's do a dance floor. Because it was something we were interested in. But very quickly, we started to understand that the notion of dances were when neighbors come together. People from different communities come together for the dance. And that really was... That was the solution to the problem. We decided, we want to make a dance floor. Then we had to find out how we're going to find a solution to why we want to make a dance floor, and that was it. It was to do with coming together, people coming together around a communal activity. And maybe that's what art is. It's a space where people come together around a communal activity, and
it's an aesthetic activity. So, I mean, the idea of the dance is that it's an aesthetic thing. And obviously, in this case, it ties into the Appalachian kind of flat footing, different forms of Irish dancing, and also kind of English traditional kind of folk dancing. There are so many kind of crossovers there that seem to make it quite a relevant thing. Also, along the border, there are lots of kind of clandestine dance floors and dance halls when dancing was kind of banned in a way, and these dance places kind of exist kind of, you know, in secret, right the way up into Donegal, where the border kind of ends. I did a project way prior to this, where there was a kind of place, a coastal cove that was a secret dancing place where people went to dance because they weren't allowed to dance in public anywhere else. So it seemed relevant, this idea of, again, I guess, borders and what's allowed in certain places and what's not, and restrictions and boundaries and such like. But maybe talk about the design of the dance floors, Neal.
Oh, the design, yes. We wanted, we felt it was necessary to have some kind of contextual imagery on the dance floors, as well as a sound to them. And so we started playing around with the borders and of Ireland and the borders of America and Mexico, and then playing around with the states. And I think we both found that was really not an easy thing to do, to take, because this was a case of really gerrymandering. I mean, it was political in a sense. We did what the politicians would do. We took the states, we took the counties, and we said, how are we going to get these to fit our purposes? And we did. And we kind of, we used various sort of like abstraction techniques with computing. So there was an integrity there.
Well, there is an integrity there.
There is an integrity. And we created these new, like, balls. They look a bit like balls of string. They also look like quite classic 19th century painting and modernist painting. And it just became interesting. We found a solution that we were running with that was becoming interesting for us.
Metric and imperial, rich and poor, north and south, abundance and scarcity, profit and debt, weak and strong, in and out, bad faith, good faith, right and wrong.
We're not entirely sure that the end product is quite the way we would have liked it to be. We had some technical problems, but
well, it was only ever going to be resolved in the space. So the 2 weeks that we're going to be in Washington was going to be the time we would finally resolve them in a live kind of situation. So currently they exist in an unfinished state, I guess, in a way, aren't they?
Well, it's finished, but I'm not sure that we're completely happy with the finished state we got it to.
I actually think a lot of this, I don't think they are finished until you show them in a way that you're satisfied with. And I think they're still, all the work, I think, the canoes as well and everything, that they were all made to be installed. And the canoes are going to be shown shortly elsewhere, but one of the canoes. But so the show never existed really. I mean, it's online in a way, which is great, but it's not. The show really would have only existed in a concrete sense when we did it, and those works would have completed in a way in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, we would be having a different conversation now if the show had gone ahead. The things that are only speculation would be in a sense more concrete, and there would be new things, something else we'd be talking about, and we certainly wouldn't be talking about pandemics or probably about Black Lives Matter or things like that. So we, there is a sense in which this is a very positive outcome in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, probably both the music and the video very much will reflect that. The video, in particular, kind of when I was, well, still am editing it. During this process, it's kind of, well, how do you deal with that? And so within the film itself, it's quite a significant element that contributes to how I've kind of sought to resolve it as a video. The effect, the kind of immediate effect of the pandemic, which happened during the process of making the work. How could you not enfold that into what you're doing, or kind of have some register of that in what you're doing? So.
Well, certainly with hindsight, because I remember we thought about, right early on, we thought about referring to the pandemic in the work, and we decided not to. I think it was just also fresh at that time, like in part of the titling for the musical piece. Yeah. But now it's like, well, it's just it's the new norm.
I get that term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, for some people it's a new norm. For other people it's just the same as it ever was.
But I hate it because some people are loving the idea of it being the new norm. I work in it, as you do, in education, and I think they're loving this kind of shift to online, which is which is a problem for working and mentoring and teaching art. Anyway, that's another conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Leave it.
That's more than enough, isn't it?
I think they'll have a job editing this, but so I'm going to stop record here. Hang on.
Okay.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Washington.
Yes, thank you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Good luck with editing this.
Okay. Bye bye.
What's going to come of me, Lord? What's going to come of me? George Buck is dead, and the last words he said was, "Dig me a hole in the ground, boys. Dig me a